All right. I think, am I recording? Did people get a message saying, yep, good. Okay. So I'm Helen Petrie. I'm Professor Emerita at the University of York, Professor Emerita of HCI. I'm also relatively recently started as editor of Interacting with Computers, the journal, and I'm treasurer of the BCS, the British Computer Society Interaction Specialist Group. So many, many hats. And we thought, given how people have now got used to online seminars during the pandemic, it is one of the small silver linings of the pandemic that we can get together and talk about HCI. So we've started this seminar series and everyone is welcome to join, whether you're a student, an academic, a researcher, a practitioner, or just interested in HCI and user experience. So please pass the message on. And I'm extremely happy to say that our first seminar is from Professor Alan Dix. I'm sure he doesn't need introduction to many people, but he's now director of the Computational Foundry at Swansea University, which I think is taking him back to his Welsh roots, which is excellent. And you probably know him as author of, or co-author of one of the key textbooks in HCI. This is the third edition, my precious copy of the third edition. And he's also coming out with a book that I think is going to be called Touch It, which I don't have my notes in front of me, which sounds like it's related to the topic of the talk today. So without further ado, I will hand over to Alan. I'll stop sharing and Alan can share his slides, and the floor is yours, Alan, for about 45 or 50 minutes.
Oh, thank you. It's yeah, it's a real pleasure. I was just looking through the the participant list and seeing lots of names I don't know as well, which is lovely, and also lots of people I know, including some that I've not seen for ages. So that's so really nice, all of you, whether new or old. This talk's actually going to be a first for me in two ways. One, it's the first time I've talked certainly at length about this particular topic in a modern HAP sense. It's got links that go back years, but in the sense of what we're doing at the moment. The other thing is I've, for the first time, given I've been doing this for 2 years, got round to actually thinking about the fact it's going over Zoom when I've designed slides. So I've deliberately created a sidebar where I hope the little pictures will go and not get in the way of the talk. So I always have this problem. So we'll see. You can give me feedback on whether that worked for you. But it's such an obvious thing, and I've just never done it until this one. Okay, yes. So I'm going to be talking about what next for UX tools. As Helen mentioned, I work in the Computational Foundry. I'm director of the Computational Foundry at Swansea University, which is a big building on a very nice setting. It's a community with sort of mathematicians, computer scientists, but also connected across the university. And critically, and my job there is to try and make this happen, is it's a mission to really do fundamental research that makes a real difference in the world. And I think that's something that comes to the heart of everybody involved in HCI, certainly, as well as lots of other parts of computing and mathematics and across academia. Okay, so there's lots of things I'm not talking about today, so I'll just slam the slide up there, including slow time. I never have time to talk about slow time, and things like regret and the nature of self, which is sort of like part-time sideline activity as it is. So lots of things I'm not talking about today, but if anything pops into your eye and you think, oh, that looks interesting, give me a shout. I does mention, physicality and product design, which there is a bit of that today, but as Helen mentioned, we've got this new book, Touch IT, coming out, which is all about physical design, of products that have physical and digital aspects. So yeah, just make that go in. So I'm going to talk about but what I am talking about is the sort of next generation of UX tools, and next generation in two senses. So in one sense, we've got existing kinds of interactions, and what are the new methods we can have to try and design those better. So things that are standard stuff that we're used to, phones and computer screens and that, but can we make those better? On the other hand, there's a lot of new kinds of interactions happening. I mean, so a lot of them, again, I can remember smell interactions going back 20 years, but they're just coming into practicality now. Obviously, loads and loads of sound with Alexas and that kind of thing. So what are these new kinds of interactions? And again, what do tools need to do to support those? The background, so in particular, we've got a project. When I say a project, this is a sort of more of an informal project, but has had some funding, but is more about a group of people coming together, which we called In Context, which is about doing this. And we've got sort of three sort of things we're trying to do. One is to just investigate it, find, what is that current state? What is the problems? What should we be doing next? The other is to sort of build some stuff that actually, some of it might be envisionment, some of it might be closer to things that you can use at a prototype level to actually investigate some different kinds of techniques. One of the crucial parts of this is about teaching, although I won't sort of expand on it in a way. It's a sort of something that sits behind it all, both in terms of teaching students, but also in terms of UX designers, ways to scaffold design better so that you learn the best approaches by doing them. So those are sort of three strands, and I'll expand on the first two of these later in the talk, including, fingers crossed, some live demo, but it's a bit like, pets and children live demos, aren't they? So we'll see. I've got some slides to back them up if that doesn't work. Crucially, there's this sort of core team of us who are looking at this. So it's myself, Anna Carter, who's also at Swansea, and Miriam Sturdy in Lancaster. And actually, in particular, Anna, I want to give a big thank you to, because she has donated the slides that she'd used when she'd been talking about this recently. And it was a good base to build on. I've put some extra things in and some different things in, but really sort of gave me a bit of a kick, all those, that business you spend all that time trying to find all the images and pictures and stuff. And she's done so much of that already. So that was wonderful. And there's also, we just had a Kai workshop, and there's a wider team who've been involved in that workshop, in planning it, organizing it, and running it at Kai. So a lot of other people involved. From a personal point of view, I mean, this is both personal, but I have gone back, anybody who's taught sort of design, certainly again, going back at least 20 years, one of the problems I've often had is you tell somebody, design something, make something, have an idea, and what do? They show you a picture of a screen, right? And of course, it's not just a screen. I remember one of them was about, and this is again, many years ago, getting a student who was talking about those, asking them to do something a little bit off the wall as perhaps the next generation. And was talking about electronic newspapers, talking about that you'd unroll, and it was done like a sort of pull-out one. You'd unroll it, you'd read it, and then when you're finished, you put it back in, and the next time you opened it, and there was a sort of page turner thing, and when you opened it, it would be back on the front page. So I said, well, where would you be reading this? I can imagine it, but I imagine myself sitting on my comfy armchair, reading the newspaper, and I reach for my cup of tea, and what happens to my nice little scroll, and it's back to the front page, and I've lost my position. And they hadn't thought about where it would be used. So I encourage the students, think about the context, where is it going to be used? A phone app that's going to be used on a wet day, having walked around Wales when it was wet some of the time, you really know you can't use those phones very easily when your finger is wet. It's different when you're using it on your own or within a group. The picture on the right there was actually on Tyree, on Little Island. And you can see some people gathered around a device, but also, and of course, one person is looking at it sideways on because it's a square device. And also on the table is a projected map of the island. So we've got both a projection, there's in the physical space, we've got people gathered together around a traditional screen. So getting people to sketch those, to draw them, to say, where is this thing being used? So years and years doing that. More recently, sort of working with Anna Carter, she's been looking at installations to go into the town centre in Swansea, including ones that were installed during COVID. So they had to be designed not to have lots of touch screens that you could touch because you can't touch things. So elbow-based interactions, things that physically moved and panned. And these are some of her sketches, her early design sketches, and then mock-ups. And we'll see a picture of the final thing later on. So these are very physical things. So as well as screens being context, some things are absolutely embedded into their physical context. And here's some sketches from Miriam, who's been working very much on transformable, stretchable, bendable, movable interfaces, including an image actually, which is very like my student talked about many years ago with the pull-out displays. And of course, you can see Miriam's sketching is somewhat up, I haven't seen mine yet, but you'll see it somewhat up from mine, because we're not all as good at doing sketches like this. So questions about how you make it easier for people to do this kind of thinking. Okay, so that's the sort of things that are going in the back of my mind. Oh yes, and here's another one of mine actually from quite recently. And this is actually a few slides from a PowerPoint deck, which I was using to do an envisionment with some people. And I was trying to talk about the older people using phones, how you help them, and struggling, to be honest, both using the PowerPoint to gather the dynamism, but struggling because I want to talk about two people in two different places, both looking at things. And as you can see my little wiggly lines to try and demonstrate this. Interesting enough, just think about doing that in a standard wireframe tool, right? It would help you do one side, but not both together. So you can start to see some of the tensions. And there are loads and loads of UX tools. I can't remember the count, but there are certainly, I think, hundreds of new design tools hitting App Store each year, probably maybe even each month, certainly each year. Obviously not all of them heavily used. Some of them probably only ever get used by the person who wrote them, but lots and lots of tools. And lots of different kinds of tools as well. They're not all the same. There are some really interesting ones, like ones where you photograph sketches and then can do walkthroughs with them. So what's the problem? There's so many tools. Why even think about doing things that are new if there's so much going on there? There's a survey that's run, I think it's every couple of, perhaps I think it is either every year or every few years, that surveys large numbers of UX designers, UX developers, product designers, 3,000 plus in 2021. I've forgotten the name of the guy who does it each time. It's a very, very broad survey, gets used a lot. So lots of different, said product designers, UI designers involved. They design all sorts of things. They tell you who they are, what their job is, what kind of things they design. So you probably can't read the words on the left-hand side, but web apps is number one, followed by websites and mobile apps. And then physical is right down the bottom, still quite small yet, what people designing physical products. But crucially, when you ask them what tools they use, and again, you might not be able to see the words down the left-hand side, but basically Figma comes out more in total, I think, than anything else put together, Sketch Next, Adobe XD, and it goes down pretty fast. There's a long, long list of different tools, but a very small number that are used heavily. I think I'm going to guess that 2022 Miro is going to jump into here reasonably high, because I'm hearing a lot of people using Miro. So we may see some changes, and that might change some of the picture of what's going on. But crucially, here are some of the tools mentioned: Adobe XD, Sketch, Figma. These are all wireframe tools. Almost all of the tools that people mention using. It's not that there are only wireframe tools, but almost all of the tools that people use are wireframe tools. What do wireframe tools tell you to do? Look at the screen. So the tools that people use are focusing on screen and focusing away from the context, and also focus on a screen, right? Not a device you can use or anything else. Not even, sometimes actually some of them do show the frame of the phone, but even that's quite rare. I've certainly never seen any. You might have noticed the pictures I had earlier. I had a finger going across the phone. It's really important to know where those fingers lie. Even that you don't see. So can we move beyond the wireframe? Can we scaffold new designers, and particularly to include rich context, but there's other things as well. Because if you're really experienced, you know to do other things as well. You will be drawing those pictures. You'll be imagining it in your head. But if you're less experienced, perhaps not. And certainly, even if you're experienced, of course, if you're constantly, your tool is focusing on the screen, you have to constantly force yourself to think out of that box. And then, of course, we go on to different modalities: sound, touch, smell. The support is minimal there at all. So investigate first. What is the current state? What's being used? So we've been doing a couple of things to this. So first of all, we've been running a number of remote workshops. This was early last year. I'm just doing my counts now, or even 2012. Losing count, which years? My goodness, the days go. But this is all, of course, during lockdown periods, during COVID periods. So we did a number of remote workshops using Miro boards, lots of Miro boards, three in total, with UX designers, some techie people, some academics, some professionals, a mix of people across a number of countries as well. So not just the UK. And I said lots and lots of Miro boards from the remote workshops. And as I mentioned earlier, we've just run a workshop at Kai as well, where we've also got some, as well as doing some online activities, some physical activities, a hybrid workshop. So some physical activities, some more informational ones, also papers from that. So we start to get an idea of some of the different things that people are doing in the area. I mean, we've got some sort of preliminary outcomes looking from some of those, and this is very much this is not the sort of a deep analysis here, but I mean, some things that we were expecting, some perhaps less so. Quite a lot of people struggling with this movement between tools, so use one tool. You can hand over often, but of course, every bit of both agile development, if you're coming from a software engineering point of view, and iterative development, if you're coming from a UX point of view, are all about going through loops multiple times. It's not about handover, it's about dynamic connections, often really hard in this sort of export-import world. You certainly want to see multimodal and physical interactions as a standard part of tools, and now they're at the edge. And also some of the gap between design and development. And this sort of fits into that first bit a bit, that, the designers and developers in terms of tools seem to sit almost completely separately, with these little bits of, yes, you can export your CSS when you've designed, if you've done a high-res prototype, but actually very, very little connection between the two. Interesting, from the Kai workshop, also beginning to see things like people thinking very deeply about the way that AI, obviously growth of AI everywhere, can be used as part of tool support. So there's clear uses of data analysis and that. I mean, that goes back way back, A/B testing and all that. But there's much more dynamically as part of a UX design process. How can we start to make use of some of these kind of things? Are just, they've been there actually in some ways for years, those, but have become possible to do with precision, with better ways than have ever been in the past. So some things are beginning. So we're beginning to get a taster for this, and certainly we're going to want to do more work in trying to tease out these, and then hopefully write this up in some better way. Okay. Oh yes, Alan Tam's doing well on my time. For once, yeah. So now what I want to do is talk to you about some of the things we've been building. I do like making things, so I'll get quite excited. So this is where we'll see whether the demos actually work or not. So we'll, fingers crossed, cross your brissa. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a few envisionments and prototypes that are just teasing this out. These are not supposed to be panacea solutions for everything. We're just teasing out a few points in this space. So first of all, I want to talk about sort of tinkering at the edges. Now, I've already shown you an example of using PowerPoint that I was to go through. And it's quite likely you've used that yourself as well as specialist tools. And I also mentioned the way that Miro is now being used quite extensively. So what you're doing is taking a tool that was designed for one place, crucially with Miro, one which is extensible in various ways, which is powerful, and then using that. So this is just an example of, and I will show you a quick demo of this. So in context, main web page, builder. So that this is just it's a, I should have shown you a clean version. I'm just going to refresh this page if I can reach the refresh button on there. Yeah. Oh no, it's remembered. No, it's look. Sorry. Anyway, so what this is a standard, wireframe buildery tool, except that. I just need to resize it slightly so I can see it. If you look at the sort of gallery of components, there's all the components, lots of standard components you can slot together to make things, for shopping, some are images for shopping sites, but, date lines, all that stuff. But what we've done, just as at the bottom, we've also added into the sort of gallery of potential components, things like people and tables and stuff like that. So that when you go to actually create things, you can create a view which is your sort of scenario style thing, a picture of the context. So all that's doing is just taking a standard tool, tweaking it a bit in order to be able to do sort of rapid sketching if you're not like Miriam and can just do magic with the tip of a pen. Okay, so that's number one. And I said, we've seen also, I've mentioned the PowerPoint, the Miro, people, you can tinker things, you can use stuff, and often we could do very good jobs using that. Interesting enough, there are small limitations in a lot of wireframing tools, not all, I'll say. For instance, often you have to specify up front the size of the thing that you're using, right? Which makes it hard to have two different devices, let alone a device and a sketch of the context in the same project. You can have two separate projects, but not in the same project. So sometimes there's very small changes, which might make a big change in the ability to use it. And that's often a very important thing to know. Okay, let's look at physical interaction. So this is the actual device that Anna's designs were used to create. And you can see this person moving this with their elbows. And what this was designed to do was to while the new city centre in Swansea was being built, to be able to see what it was going to look like. So people in the town see all of this building going on, and they could look and say, what's this going to be like for me? What's it going to be like in a few years? All this disruption of having building going on, is it going to be worth it, basically? It's a very important, elbows. There's also a lower version that you can use if you're a child or if you're in a wheelchair. Lots of details here about the physical placement. There is a screen on it, by the way, that you'll see. But the movements, most of that screen is done using elbow movements, and there's some foot pedals which you can't see in this picture as well. So not standard controls, not touch screen or anything like that. There's also things about the environment itself. So the grass that appears to be below his feet is actually some form of astroturf, because wheelchairs have to go on it, and people who are disabled, and you don't want to have something where you're going to slip over and fall over, basically. So there's lots of physical things about the environment as well as the device itself, and they're all part of the design. They aren't two separate things. This is one design that involves all of those. So this is something we created to try and sort of think about, and this actually came out of some video workshops, actually, rather than directly from the in context workshop. But how do you, in a virtual world, particularly during lockdown, talk about physical designs, or when they're at a very early stage? So what I've got here is a little, this is my mock-up of a controller for the Rockall Maritime Authority to use to guide their remote controlled ships, which are, their fishery protection ships, because, Rockall's recently been independent, you might have heard about that. And so obviously they want to protect their fishing waters. So this is the remote control, and it's got you can see a thing at the top that you can move to control the direction of the ship. There's a power control at the bottom and a little flap here. So I could demonstrate this live to you. If you were here, with me, you could pick it up and play with it. Only actually, if you played with it, bits would probably fall off quite quick, because it's just made out of cardboard and glue and stuff. It's not that, that bit comes off very, very easily. Just a drawing pin through it. And the sticky that holds this flap keeps falling off as well. So what I did was I created a series of short videos. In fact, one video with lots of things that's then marked into segments. And I will now do another live demo. And this depends on you hearing the sound. We'll see. You can tell me whether you can put thumbs up whether you hear me speak. So I'm going to do, I've got, in fact, I'll just close that hatch a second. So you notice, oh, it's not played. I think the playing the video is struggling a little bit with the Zoom. So I've got the device, and you can know what I've got down the left-hand side is things I can do, physical manipulations I can do with the device. They're not about the boat, they're about the device. What can you physically do? I can move the wheel to left and right. I can move this little flag back and forth, and I can lift the flap. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the hatch. Lift flap. Did you hear that, the video? Oh, some of you did. It was a bit quiet. Oh, okay. It said lift flap as it did it. So I've got this video. It's got some sound on, and it just shows the action happening. And each action, there's a little video clip. So what you can do is you can, and you notice now the actions that are available are different. It doesn't have open hatch anymore, but it has close hatch. And it's also got press red button, because of course you couldn't press the red button when the hatch was closed, because the red button is hidden behind the flap. And this is being driven basically by a spreadsheet that's got, I mean, various things about the video clipping, but also this is effectively a little finite element, a finite state-ish model of the physical device that says what is possible to do on the physical device and how each thing you do changes the nature of it. There's a video clip for each transition you can do. And so you remotely, you can effectively experiment and see the things happen. It's obviously not the same as touching it and feeling it, but you can get a sense of actually using this prototype, even as a physical prototype, even though it's not real, it's just a bit of cardboard remotely. So that's a sort of, again, another example. And the other thing I'll note though, as I go back to here, it also connects into other things as well. There's a few other bits, but that's the crucial bit. Yeah, I showed you that device, actually the way in which the transitions were described. So in a sense, this is a little bit, I mean, in a very sort of, it's not code as in the code that runs in the computer. It's more of a modeling type thing, but we have actually a bit of modeling going on of this device in a fairly simple way here, set into this spreadsheet model of the device. So it's sort of starting to bridge in a way, and that sort of code to design barrier. So let's think about storyboards now. So in fact, yeah, I think this actually is more of Anna's storyboard. Yeah, I was just trying to work out what it was to see, but you know about producing storyboards and that. So what we've been trying to do is think about how we can connect this sort of storyboarding with the sort of wireframing. So this is for things where there is a screen, but where you want to see how it fits into the bigger picture. So what we do is designed a scenario viewer. So, and I'll demonstrate this in a moment. I'll stay on this where you've got both, at each step, you have the context as an image, as a sketch image. Now you can see my sketching, right? You can see what my sketching looks like. And also a sketch of what's on the screen. And if there's multiple devices, you can have multiple ones there. And what the idea is you can step through the scenario and look at both in parallel. And we'll just see an example of this happening in here. So this is, and in fact, one of the examples I remember that I had a student once who was, I know internet fridges are a bit old hat now, although they're still, they sort of keep tootling along, don't they? They've been there for years. But I had a student wanting to design internet fridges, but to talk about this in a wireframe tool, all you could do was draw what was on the fridge. You couldn't draw the fridge. So we got the fridge, and I can step through the scenario. The person now sits on their armchair. They work out their shopping list. From the fridge, they can see what's in the fridge now. They go to their armchair, connected app, say what they want, tick things off. They go to the supermarket. They can see their list, pick off the things, and later that night they go to their smart TV, connect to the My Fridge app, and maybe just check what they bought and see whether there's anything they want to think. So they can have a look and see what they got that day and how much they were spending and all that sort of stuff. So you can sort of go through the scenario. So I've got this version. This is a version, the same one. So this is with once. Well, on the right-hand side, this was me just using wireframing. On the left-hand side, this is Miriam doing stuff, doing her magic. And but you notice actually what I've done is done a mixed fidelity versions as well, because again, it's interesting the way that tools force you to stage stuff. And actually that's not the case. If you said there's some login screens, come on, you know what those are like. You can worry about those later. You probably want to worry about the bit in the middle and perhaps do that in more detail before you worry about making the login screens in more detail. So here you've got the same scenario. So some of it is still in this sort of form and some of it is in magic Miriam form. But you notice here a mix here. So I've got the television set the same, the person's looking at it, but we have the sketch version shown on the screen. And you might have noticed too, if you look at detail, that screen is changing as the device changes. What we're doing is we're embedding the device image into the context. It's a very small thing to do. It's not that not hideously complicated. Rubbish is when you write papers, don't say it's all trivial, because people say it's all trivial. That's all. Say how complicated it is, but it isn't. It is not that complicated in one way. The doing, it's about doing it. It's not about how to do it. There, I've given the game away there. So again, we'll just expand that. Art. Yeah, so we're seeing the ones, we're doing these contexts, and this is said it's just an envisionment, and we're just moving it to the point where you could play with it yourself. I mean, it's not intended to be a final tool, but one where you could actually upload things. At the moment, you can't, for this one, have to do a little bit of back-end editing for it. Crucially, though, I mean, one of these the little bit of magic is when you've got a device in the image, and you can do this for multiple devices, so you can mark out the phone as well as the screen. You can mark out the corners of the devices, which and then magically creates, with great hard math, of course, creates a CSS 3D transformation to actually take the screen image or the device image and put it into the context. Often it's too small to actually read, but you get that sense of dynamism through doing it, which is, I mean, it's quite jolly how critically important it is running alongside it. But again, it's about trying to give you that sense that this screen is actually part of that environment. Probably if you've got a bit of experience, it's less necessary than if you've got less, I think. Okay, I always overrun, so I didn't do well today. So actually, good timing, good time. So there's plenty of time if you want to ask some questions. So what's next? What's next here? So the workshops we've done some of the analysis already, and we really need just, spend a bit more time together as a team and work this out into a sort of roadmap-y type paper. Not to draw a box around this, but really to show some of the options. Because actually I put them right at the end, I'll repeat it then, but because I think there's actually lots of interesting things here. So if you're somebody thinking, what do I do next? Maybe there's some things a lot in this area that you might fancy. So we're trying to give that sense of what's there and what should be there, but isn't. Particularly obviously senses beyond sight, and Anna, as well as dealing with physical things that flip around like this, or you push with your elbows, is also looking at scent-based interfaces. How do we convey those sort of things? We're not in any, I think, close future going to be easily producing scent-based prototypes. We'll have prototypes that sent in, but as in a generic tools to do this. So we probably need nice iconographies and stuff like that. But I mean, there's a whole comic strip tradition that we can build on this. Touch, possibly even more so. But obviously, when you do have a scent device, how do we easily link those prototypes to the actual devices so that we can run them? I mean, you've got some techniques for doing that with physical prototypes, still pretty poor, to be honest. haven't got their way out of the research lab. But we want to do this with other centres. I think audio is a very obvious one. I think that's going to be an easier first hit. There's some clear links to service design here. And I think the service designers are used to doing these sort of swim lane things. And in one way, it's a bit like swim lanes here. It's not quite the same, but we've got sort of almost like levels of detail going on. It's less who and where, but more levels of detail that we're looking at. Certainly this context sketching, how do we make that help people over that barrier? Some of that's about confidence. And again, Miriam and others run workshops to help people learn how to sketch. And actually, when you do those things, it's not always, it's often easier than when people think to do things that are useful enough. But it's about methods that make that easy, especially if you want to have things that are a bit more dynamic, that change and have people moving and stuff, so you don't have to draw every frame. On the more sort of techie side of this, this idea of handing over stuff, there are early in the design process, one makes architectural decisions about software, which have profound interaction impacts later on. And those are often completely dissociated from the early UX design process. And you need to have connections there. It doesn't mean trying to write code from day one. But for instance, many years ago when I was .comming, we didn't design our architecture in this way, but the way we explained and created technical documentation of our architectures was by taking the scenarios that we'd used as marketing scenarios and then showing how each step mapped through onto the architectural components. So it's very easy to see, no, this is going to be a problem, there's going to be bottlenecks here. So, ways in which we can sort of do those sort of maps earlier on in ways that are, so we say, equally sketchy on both sides. We don't demand a fixed pixel perfect design before we start thinking about code, but neither do we expect solid code. We might be into either a formalism or some sort of architectural view or some sort of data oriented view that is not finished when we start talking about its connection to those designs. And in general, integration, this has come up. In other areas, I mean, like I've been working in heritage projects, and this comes up there as well. The file systems we have, the way we talk between applications belongs in the 1970s. It's all exporting to files, importing files. And I mean, obviously that's really powerful. The reason it's still here and it's been designed in the 1970s is because it's powerful and it's generic and works. But there's a level to which when we want to talk about this sort of integration, it's not fit for purpose. And even more so, and of course it isn't all in your file system, when things are on cloud devices in different ways and various storages. So I think there's a lots of stuff there. And I said, I think one of the, mentioned earlier on with training, there's both a sense in which can we design tools which scaffold the UX designer more to help them do the right things, but also probably similar or maybe the same or maybe similar tools which help in the learning process for those who are actually training up in these ways. And then I said, yeah, I think maybe there's something for you here. There's things we're doing. This is a process. This is not a finished project. This is a work in progress. It's something that's like a blossoming flower, so take a whiff of it, see whether you like the smell of it, and if you do, give us a shout, and we can, or just do stuff. But hopefully we'll have in 5 years time, it won't just say wireframing at the top of that list. Okay, thank you. That's me for now.
Great, thank you, Alan. One of the big disadvantages of online seminars is we can't all burst into applause, but that was a really stimulating and interesting seminar or talk. So Liz Stewart has a comment. Would you like to unmute yourself and speak, Liz?
Absolutely. I'm an Irish woman, so I'm more than happy to speak. It's how we're born. I thought the talk was really interesting. To be honest with you, I'm overwhelmed with marking at the minute, but I'm so glad I made the time to do this. I really thought it was really great just to push the boundaries a bit of how we do this design. However, as somebody who's teaching this stuff with the students from a computer science point of view, it's so hard to get them to even think about UX, about evaluation, and it's seated, it's like prizing and not open, trying to get them away from Figma. Any suggestions how we might, I mean, I used to lecture with that cans going through tubes to show how packets were sent across a network, and I'm a huge fan of physical, any sort of mock-ups in that way. But any advice?
Well, just to make you feel, I'll make you feel more depressed first of all on this. When we first started, as some of you know, I used to run, and we're going to run another one, the first post-COVID Tyree Tech Wave in September. So this is on Tyree, little island. Then various people came and did stuff, and particularly a big group used to come from sometimes master students, I mean academics as well, from Cardiff Met University, from the product design course there. And listen, these are product designers, these are not CS ones. And I remember the first couple of times when a group came from there, they made stuff. It was all, 3D printers, white, blue foam. And it was almost like overnight change. They all just, we had to force them not to create screens. And these are the product designers. So it is really hard, and it's because the tools make it easy and stuff. So again, one of the reasons for thinking about tools is that the tools frame you. They don't consider. This is a bit like, do you know Shapir-Whorf hypothesis for language? It's not that you can't think outside the tools, but the tools shape the way you think. I used to talk about the grain, and not grain as in granularity, but like a woodworker. If you go with the grain, it's easy to do. It's not you can't cut across the grain, but it makes life harder. You need more skill. And so I think getting the tools is part of that issue, because that if it's easy, it's a general rule, if it's easy to do the right thing, people do the right thing. So like, that's not rocket science. This is true in all aspects of life. So something to remember. For the CS students, especially, I mean, it's something I've been, it's interesting. I've been both thinking about what sort of more UX people need to know about implementation, and that's become an issue with the, actually I've got my interaction design foundation t-shirt, but I was doing a rerun, which is a re-recording, but also with a few edits or changes of the HSI course I have for them. And one of the bits we've redesigned extensively is the implementation module, because my whole history was teaching that to CS people. And because what's right there, but of course it goes the other way around. So there's that, but how do we actually, when I talk to jumping around in my head, but when I talk to front-end developers, right, they are passionate about their users. And for every UX designer, there's probably about 10 front-end developers out there, right? They are passionate about their users. And they care about things like, they spend a lot of time talking about frameworks and things like this as well as, but they care about the users. My guess is that if they did a CS, most of them will have gone through a CS degree and they'll have done their HSI course, they will have not been passionate about that course. So a question I keep asking myself, especially as somebody who writes HSI textbooks, other textbooks, is, what's the things that make them passionate? And I think actually making some of these, I don't want to say, make your HSI more techy, but actually there is an element to this. I think we could get so lost in thinking we need to do this hearts and minds thing that churns people into UXy people. And obviously there's a whole set of skills that you just do not have from a straight CS course, but it has to connect. And I mean, I'm not saying I've got that tapped at all, and I have struggled with this. But again, anything we can do which helps that fluidity. But then the final thing I'll say on that is, I remember once, this was, which just, so this is sort of an emphasis, the ways that the practical thing that really kicks home. I was once talking about, it was a physical thing, it wasn't one of these. I was using a Swiss Army knife. We were talking about internet-enabled Swiss Army knives and how you could have a little screen on them and use the toothpick as a fester thing. But it was only as we acted out using the Swiss Army knife that I realized that thumb went over the screen. And it was a very visceral thing that reminded you that you had to take into account this wider picture. So actually, I don't know if yeah, acting is very useful there. I don't know if the tools would have helped there. I mean, that's why I said it's really important probably to have a thumb on those imaged, on even, you know, if you've only got the thumb and the finger on your Figmas, you probably go up quite a notch actually in terms of design. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Billy. Billy, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, sorry. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Mhm.
We can't see you, but we can hear you.
I'll turn the camera. Oh, no, it doesn't work. Forget
Don't
that.
worry.
Anyway, my question is, I've come from a background where I studied UX UI, and we heavily used cloud-based products such as Figma and Miro, and I love them. But I've gone into a workplace where cloud-based products aren't allowed because government-wise, security-wise, not allowed. Figma's fine because I can go straight to Adobe XD. I have no problem with that. But Miro, I'm having a really big problem trying to find an alternative other than physically having post-it notes. Is there any other alternative that you know of that isn't cloud-based for that?
So, I mean, maybe somebody will jump in. I say, well, one of the things, oh, okay. Yeah, so one is I don't know, but I'm sort of wondering if anything else will pop into the chat. I thought, Alan, you were gonna give an example, but it wasn't you to ask a question. No. But if there's anybody there who knows some good alternative chats in. One of the things that we've also realized, and actually isn't in that list, I mean, I just gave a list thing, but tools that bridge physical to digital domain. So those post-it notes, even if you're an expert, well, super expert Miro users just do magic with them. But I know I'm not a super expert, and things that use those post-it notes, but then bring those back into the digital domain, I think, but I don't know of tools that do that. And certainly one of the things has come out so many times is how you move from whether it's post-it notes or sketching into something that uses some of the power of the digital domain. So some things it's really, you know, your real estate, you know, to be honest, when you're doing post-it notes is just so much better. You know, we never have screens that well. I mean, some, you know, big cavey environments. So I think there's some real challenges there. So you can use those physical post-it notes and do your design with them and yet go forward. But I'm afraid I don't know if everything's going so cloud so fast. I think it makes it feel nobody has jumped in. I was sort of vaguely hoping somebody might jump in. But, so sorry, I can't help more, but I think that's a really interesting challenge there.
That's a good thing. Very much the answer.
Yeah, and I can just jump in and say, actually, it's a problem because we would like to have a tool for teaching students, and because they're all cloud-based, it's really limiting us. So I don't know of an alternative.
Yeah.
But
one thing,
Alan.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing. Oh, so I'll just.
Yes.
The other Alan, but one thing I have to say is, which we'll do with the scenario if we've not got there yet, but with some of the other prototypes we've been building that are sort of in other ones, deliberately making them so that you get in browser storage. Now, it wouldn't satisfy your security ones because still the actual code is coming off the web. But certainly by doing that, one of the advantages of that is you can distribute things so that people can use them, they can upload stuff into them, but without needing the cloud storage. So there isn't, both from a distributor, from a prototyping point of view, you know, don't have to try and build the back ends and all that sort of stuff and deal with user management and people misusing stuff and all the stuff that goes with that. But also means that, you know, anybody can use it. You don't have to then charge for that because it's all of the space storage is local. And browsers now are at the point when it didn't used to be this way, but now you can put a lot of storage locally. I mean, I've been doing sort of full audio media applications all in browser with nothing going to the cloud at all. So I think there's some ways ahead there, and particularly then thinking about students being able to have things where people can use something that's fully functional. If they wanted to share with people to the cloud, okay, that's the bit they can't do, but certainly from a local point of view.
Alan, over to you for your question.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Keep
You've been very
promising.
patient.
I'm going to get you a long stick to give Alan a bit of a poke. Yeah, it was just, I'm working on a, well, I'm sort of leading the creative industry sector on a large project, the Trustworthy Autonomous Systems Hub. And one of the things that I'm having difficulties with imagining is designing for intelligent systems where not only is the context changing all the time, but the outputs of the system can be changing all the time and unpredictable. And one of the areas that causes me particular difficulty is obviously as we're engaging more and more responsible research and innovation, we can't just go to like members of academic staff and students. You need to go to the real world and understand what happens in the wild. So if I were to implement any of these technologies, health and safety executive guidelines, for example, on collaborative robotics, it's a big issue. You're entering into kind of an entire world of unions and legislation and law, but at the same time, you gather a huge amount of knowledge from these sorts of deployments. So I think winding back from that, one of my questions to Alan is, do you see tools starting to emerge in the future that will be able to, have a degree of predictability built in them that tell you how something might happen in a context? And is there any movements at the moment to try and document dynamic, intelligent design?
Yeah. So, I mean, because two sides. One thing was, again, I mentioned the use of some of the stuff, the papers we got for the Kai workshop were about the use of AI in design, but also there are ones which were exactly considering the fact that the things you're designing have AI in them and therefore are, I mean, to be honest, computer systems have always been unpredictable. They might be deterministic, but that does not make them predictable by any means. But in perhaps a more fundamental sense, unpredictable. So I don't think there were sort of solid answers to that. I mean, interesting enough, and you will know this, and others will know that my earliest forays into HSI were in formal modeling. And in fact, one of the, I was trying to think, about 89, 90, I remember writing exactly about non-deterministic systems and the ways in which you might analyze things. And there are various techniques. So there's a big gap though, because there's sort of formal techniques. And you notice that there was a formal model in the model of this physical thing. That is a formal model. It doesn't, it's a sort of, you do this happens type model, but it's a formal model. It's an analyzable model. So in one sense, the sort of, I'm designing this world, this thing type thing is a very different sort of person from the, I'm doing the hard maths and lambda calculus and stuff. But again, how can we bring those together in ways which are appropriate uses? My very first computing as opposed to mathematics job, I worked for Cumbria County Council, and I didn't know the term, but I basically used formal methods in my practical building of systems, and they improved. They made it easy to do debugging. They made it easy to communicate with clients. I used them, but they were not. They were chosen at a level that was communicative, and so there's some really interesting things about where we can have, to say, the sketchiness of different things come together. On the more physical things, the robotics, I mean, I think, some of those problems are going to be fundamental. One of the things I have for many years thought, and I don't think, I mean, I'm sure people have done this, but I have certainly not seen it done in volume, but from the sort of very first ubiquitous computing IoT days, the obvious prototyping style is VR. I mean, it doesn't do everything, but if you're going to prototype a ubiquitous, smart home, you'll and do it in a way that it has flexibility. VR is the obvious place to do it. I mean, exactly. So it's not that you get everything that way. There's going to be bits that you miss, but your ability to just know ground truth where somebody is in the VR environment, to be able to model accuracy of sensors and play with those, all those kinds of things, but also things like robotics. So that might, I mean, but I said I haven't seen that done. And again, if anybody else has. But I mean, that's one way which would just make, again, so much sense. And the technology of doing that is now so much more, so accessible. So I guess actually there may be a confluence point there that you can do something. And so it's not going to be perfect, but you can be in a much better position to be able to perhaps put somebody into that environment without being, they might throw up a bit, but otherwise they're probably reasonably, from a health and safety point of view, in a reasonably safe space.
Yeah. Thanks, Alan.
Yeah.
Great stuff.
A question from S. Dalton. Sorry, I don't know your first name. Are you still there to ask this question?
Yes. See his picture. It's hello.
Well, I will read out the question.
Yeah,
so,
sorry. Fiddling around with buttons.
Hi.
Hiya.
I assumed it was you, but I wasn't 100% sure. There might be another S. Dalton.
Indeed, yeah. Yes, it was about, I mean, it was interesting the way you were talking about context. And what was interesting is that obviously there's a lot of early work in things like body storming and informant's design. And what was interesting was it seemed to very much, in my mind, relate to those kinds of early techniques back from the, early techniques, I'm saying back from the 1990s, not early in absolute terms, I guess, but certainly the idea of kind of context and then how, but I think it was very interesting what you were saying about how to kind of try to map that into the design process. Do you think we should militate to get tools revised? It's like, can we have a strike on Figma?
I mean, people are voting with their feet, so obviously it's something that works for people. So I think that's the crucial thing. So you can't, say, thou shalt not use Figma. Or they might with a student. I mean, they can, maybe there are those times when deliberately not using something and saying, what can you do without, can be a good educational thing. But obviously, if you're in the middle of a design project, you're going to use what delivers for you. So I think the onus is certainly not to say don't use Figma, but what would be better, or how could Figma be better? So you can see it either way around. And actually, it's interesting actually, because the things that quite a few of these wireframing tools do well from a context point of view is they often make it relatively easy to actually have the prototype running on the device. If it is that kind of device, obviously it's not always going to be, but a lot are. So in that sense, you can see it in context by prototyping and going out into context. So there are things that those tools do really, really well. So we've got to be careful not to say, oh, it's all a load of rubbish. It's not all of those. There's some really great stuff out there, but it's just the bits that are missing. And again, my gut reaction always try and make it as easy as possible to do the right thing, not to make it harder to do the wrong thing. It's so much of our life is like that. So much of education, I mean, let alone the legal system. But if you think about universities, that's what we do all the time. We just slap people on the wrist for doing things wrong rather than, oh dear, oh yes, it's rule of life, make it easy to do things right and everything sorts out. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure that answered you actually, but
well, I've got a quick question now and more of a comment really. I think one of the reasons our students go immediately to wireframes is that they want to externalize their ideas for the interaction, and that's all that exists. So I think this is a great idea. I also think there's great potential here to support accessibility work, because one of the things that has struck me that now, if you look at the iPhone, for example, they've got a really great screen reader, but it's completely disconnected from what a sighted person is doing on their iPhone. which may be the best thing because it's optimized for blind people, but it means if I'm liaising with a blind person, or if my blind friend gets stuck, which has happened, it's really hard for me to help them as a sighted person. So I think having a system where when you bring in the multimodality, you actually are designing in parallel, or perhaps an intelligent system could generate, okay, if you do this for the sighted users, this is going to be what ought to happen for the blind user or person with another disability. I mean, that's a kind of perhaps a idealistic view, but I think there's great potential to both create systems which bring people together, but also to support the designers.
Yeah, I mean, I think, because there's obviously is a whole little, again, on the sort of engineering stroke formal side of computer, there's this of HSI on sort of plastic user interfaces now, which is very often, and model-based user interfaces, which has never become mainstream. I mean, for a variety of reasons. I mean, one of them is if you start with model, you often end up with okay-ish, but not really usable systems. Having said that, it's weird because in one sense, if you know that like a phone app is different from a web app, and and I'm not expert enough, but I've done bits in the past, but if you were designing something from scratch for an unsighted user, some fairly fundamental things about interaction order would almost certainly be different, right? Yep. So it's things aren't. It's interesting with CSS. You're sort of it's also true of different screen sizes, but we just think we can automatically do it. One of the things that have been tried at various stages, and I mean, Apple tried to do this quite one, and I was trying to think a lot of years ago, was to try and get developers to separate out the sort of very front end of stuff from the sort of data command level. Yes. And sometimes that's very hard to do. That doesn't make sense to do. If you're, I don't know, if you're doing fine graphic manipulations, it gets things. But for a lot of things, you're pressing buttons, you're sliding sliders. The reason Apple were doing it was to enable scripting. I mean, it didn't help that half of their own apps didn't do this separation. So they didn't obey their own rules, and surprise, surprise, nobody else did either. But one of the advantages now, I'd say we're probably, in some ways, the industry practice has moved towards. So if you think about a lot of the toolkits are based on data layers. So rather than it can, so we're actually in the point when we're starting to see that idea that the data layer, the data can map onto things, and that's being used as part of agile design techniques. There is a possibility, but I say it's going to possibility because it does that would offer the potential to actually make some of these better. So you're not trying to take, again, with this, I know that problem you mentioned is there's two ways I think there's the surface layer itself. Can you actually share the surface layer? But very often something's a little bit below the surface, yes, but isn't the surface, which is the key point. But I said I'm being a bit so optimistic here, saying, but I think we are, if you think about where the technology is happening of its own accord for the visual interfaces, there is that. I think we're at a point when it would make, I think if Apple were to do the same again today, and particularly for web-based interfaces, I think it would be in a much better position to do so. More people are more likely to do it. So maybe there's some hope there, but it's and again, if that building, that's again one of the reasons why you want to try and build that sort of early data design alongside the UX design, and to be able to deal with things at different levels of fidelity. So I may not just to say at one point to say I want to tell the user about X. And actually, that's what you write in your design tool. In thing, you might not know how to at that point, so that you might design, one part, one modality more faster than another, particularly if you're more capable at it. You know, you're more, if you're a sighted UX designer, you're probably going to be better at doing that. But actually saying, but what's important here is I would like an unsighted user to be able to do this. And then maybe somebody else who's more specialist will be able to step in, take the same
Yes.
levels and pull back up. But I might be a bit optimistic and think.
Yes, that's a good alternative, as it were. Yeah. I'm conscious that time is moving on and people are leaving. Someone's just asked, is this seminar recorded? Yes, we're recording it. It will be on our website, or at least there'll be a link on the website. If in doubt, go to the Interacting with Computers website, where all this information is going to be linked as well. And I would just like to end by thanking Alan again very much for a really stimulating and interesting talk, and to remind everyone that this is going to be a monthly event, but because it's a worldwide event, next month, the last Monday of the month, we're having a speaker coming direct to us from Beijing in China. So it's going to be 10 a.m. British time, which may be something different for you, 10 a.m. British summer time. A very interesting sounding talk about talking with an Internet of Things conversational agent. So please join us with a morning coffee if that's your time zone in a month's time. And then we'll haven't got a seminar organized for July yet, but I'm sure we'll find one, and then we'll have a break in August. But we have interesting seminars coming up in September. We've got Gilbert Cockton talking, and in October we've got Professor Marian Ursu from the University of York talking about digital storytelling. So information will be coming about that. So Alan, thank you very much for a fascinating inaugural talk. It was great to see you. It was great to see lots of people, as you said, some familiar names and lots of unfamiliar names, which is really good. And see you all in a month's time, hopefully. Right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done, Alan. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.
And Alan, lots of thank yous in the text. Mm.